So I have logged into a client. I have got a client with 2 assets and they are currently stationary. And we're going to go into the reporting section. Now, I've already opened this previously earlier today, and I'm on the commonest report, the trip listing. So before we start there, I'm just going to remind you that everything that you see has been set up previously on the client. We have now grouped the reports so your customers don't get confused when they decide they want to run a trip listing report listing versus a trip listing daily summary. These are now all individually identified in the list. So there should be no reason why anybody should get confused to finding a particular report. Right, so what I said initially about manual reports is consider this a template. And by that, I mean everything that you see on the right-hand side of the screen can be edited. So let's start with the title, okay? You can create your own title for a manual report. To create one called Trips for the Day in Detail. I can choose my output. The CSV is the raw format versus the CSV, which is the formatted or processed format. Mode is not a concern for all the device types we have running on the platform. The older devices can be run in scan mode. Now, the time frame or the date range. As I said earlier, the data stores store the data, and there are some reports and some data that is pre-populated. Trips are pre-populated. Therefore, we will allow a report to run for the full month. So the whole of May can be chosen as an option, or this month, okay? Other reports, and we'll show you some examples, when they run, the limit is 7 days. Because line by line telemetry, you can imagine how many lines of data we get, how many events we get, and to give you the optimal report in terms of time taken to run, we will limit that to 7 days. Rather than trying to give you a report with 30 days that takes 3 to 4 to 5 times as long to run as a 7-day, because it'll be data dependent, we limit the time frame. So you can choose your time frame. As importantly, you can choose which of your vehicles or assets you've chosen. You can choose them by cost center, by group. Again, customizable. Do I only want to see a specific group? Do I only want to see a specific cost center? Or do I want to run it across my whole fleet? Minimum distance, as we know, we can choose. And then here becomes here is the important part. And the power in the system is that you can group the information. So I've only got 2 assets. I could group the information by date. I can choose to have a page break if I would like to print this out and make it nice and neat. And alternatively, I just leave it with none. And then the fields that are at the bottom. What I'm going to do is remove them. So imagine if I said to you, this is what you were faced with. It's a bit daunting, right? But now what I was trying to explain initially is consider each report as a template, is because I can go in and add all the fields that I actually would like. So let's start with the asset, because I'm choosing this by date. It wasn't there initially as a template goes. Now I would like to know when the trip started, when they ended, where they went from, where they went to. I'd like the distance. And then what I would like to know is the idle time. And I would like to know the maximum speed. You can see there's a whole lot of information that you can add that weren't in the original template. And this is why I say consider it a template to start with. Because if you find that the customer is saying, well, what was X or Y? It might already be in the fields that are an option to add, but not by default on the report on the front end. So the other thing to consider is every one of these fields is editable. I can change the order. I can edit all of these things to my heart's content. And as importantly, I can change the width and the alignment. So this report, we started out, it had a different name. The time frame was yesterday or today, and it had a different set of parameters and group by. It is now my specific report that I'm going to run. And while that's running, I'm going to go back and show you other reports that I was talking about. So we talked about speeding. Speeding requires a line-by-line telemetry, and this is why there are limits to the last or to the date range you can choose when running it. So every report that you see with a specific limit is based on how the data is processed within the data stores. So each one of these, again, you can change these fields. So sometimes, for example, with the speeding report, we don't want the latitude and the longitude. No problem. Just change this around to the format you want it. And if there's no driver, you can do that. And again, having standard fields, and some of them have the ability to add the custom field in. So you can go in and edit these reports to your heart's content. Okay. All right, so this report that I ran earlier has finished, and notice the kilometers field is a little cut off. Okay, maybe I want the kilometers centered. All I do is click the rerun button. It takes me back to the same report that I had earlier. Notice the title's the same, the information's the same, but this is not wide enough. I want it centered. I want idling centered. I want maximum speed centered, and I can rerun it. Now, I can as well, if I like that output, immediately save that as a template, which we'll get to now. There's the report. Notice everything is nice and neat, and notice the name is different. It's trips for the day in detail, and all the information is displayed the way that I would like it displayed. I've got my date, I've got my vehicles in alphabetical order, everything showing me the data as I asked the report server to send it. So I can go back now to that report. And the last thing is I would like to save that as a template. Now it will default back to the type of report that I chose initially. So I'm going to rename it to what I like. And then you can give it a description. And that description you see is the description we gave to the trip listing report. So if you would like to change this, you can change just some words, okay? And then you can choose to just give it a little bit of a different description so that your customers know what it means. And then you can choose what you would like to make visible to the users so that they can edit these. So if you want to default your minimum distance, but you don't want your client to see it, then remove the field. So then everything will be, as I say, visible to the client, whatever you choose. And when you save it, it now appears in our custom reports, and there it is. And then when I run it, notice I've lost some of my fields. I've lost the mode, and I've lost the minimum distance, thereby making it less editable by your customer. If, for example, I want to change it, I can immediately go in, update the template. Let's say I want to remove the asset filter so that I don't want them to change which assets. Notice it'll do the same. So my template is updated. And now this is a trip. List the trips for all vehicles. Now, because we've chosen a date range, they can edit the date range. So you can see this is very powerful to building a template from a report that had other details in it. Now, the other thing I would like to show you on the same report is this information under the add. Now notice under this particular report, and this occurs on other reports as well, notice initial, final, min, max, total, and rate are all blank. This is because I haven't added any IR types to the platform that can be used to show the value in the report. So what I'm going to do is go into administration. I'm going to enable or undelete an IR type that was created earlier. And I'm going to enable it. Okay, I'm going to go back to my client, go back to the particular device I know that the RPM is available on. And I'm going to go into my CAN, choose RPM, save, oops, maximum. So that's my red line. Save that. All right, so that's all now pulled through there. Now, this won't be available yet over here. So all I do now is, just for interest's sake, reload my software. And now what happens is, just to prove the point, when you open up a trip, we will now see the RPM. So the data is now displayed on the front end. And in reporting, I can go to the trip listing report and I can add, notice, initial RPM, final RPM, minimum RPM, or maximum RPM. So as I said, each of these reports, consider them as a template, and there is lots of information you can give your customers. They are linked to what you set up in the platform as well. So as you saw, I created an IR type, and I'm able to add the maximum RPM, for example, into this report so they can also see that particular field. Now, the other options that are also available on some reports are like the custom fields that are available that you've created in the client, as well as in this particular report, the event count. So if you'd like to add in the number of speeding events or harsh braking, harsh cornering, you can add these into the reports as well, okay? So there's a lot of information you can add to a report when your customer is asking for something very specific. Now, just as an example, you could, for example, change the trip listing report to a speeding report just by doing this. Overspeed event. So now I've chosen just 3 fields. And guess what? I can tell you how many times this driver has sped for the whole of May, for example. By events. So now I can change, I'm using a trip listing report, and I can literally, maybe we should change this and just do it by asset and remove that. Okay. And there is a report from a trip listing report. I've created a speeding report. So now I'm going to run that report. It might take a little bit longer than normal because we're pulling in the events, as I explained. It's pre-populated with the trips, but obviously now we're looking for the telemetry. I now have a different report from this template. And that's an important thing to consider, that you don't have to limit yourselves with what we give you as the final output. So there is a speeding report, as I say, and we'll see what the data looks like. And any report can be used as a template within reason. So if, for example, you want a full month's worth of event counts, you can use this report. Whereas the event report, if you list the number of events, you will only, well, you will actually get the full month count. I stand corrected, but you can do the same, but this doesn't give you, let's say, the maximum speed that the vehicle drove or something else, but you can do the same with any one of these reports, as long as you have the information at your disposal. So for example, we could add an RPM into the digital event report. So you can actually become quite creative with manual reports. And you can, as I say, take a template and change it. Now there's the report. Now, it doesn't look so good, so I would probably use a daily summary report, and I would use the same fields as this. But here you can see we should have actually added in, all right, I made a mistake. We should have added in the, let's say, the start time, just so that we know what trip that was for. But you can see that this is an experiment. I didn't preempt this by going in and building something particular that I'm showing you. I'm doing this on the fly. So you can see this is a trip listing report. It might be easier to go and use the trip listing daily summary and do the same thing, because now you could choose by date, add the asset, and so forth. So I just wanted to show you that as a very powerful tool. Don't think of reports as limiting, think of them as a template. All right. So once you've created, and all the different reports have this ability, once you've created your particular report and you like the report like this, once it's in a custom format, it is now available to be used for schedules. And that brings us to part 2 of this talk, scheduling reports. So I'm going to remove the current schedules. Actually, I'm not going to remove the current schedules. So as you are aware, there are 2 things to do with scheduling reports. First and foremost, though, is to create a schedule and give the schedule a unique name. This is the name that lands up in the user's inbox. So calling it trip listing report gives little or no detail. So if I wanted to have driver behavior reports, then I know that when that lands in my inbox, it is for driver behavior. So anything that is linked to this particular schedule is a particular type of report. Driver behavior, trips, speeding, whatever the case may be. Choose your run as. Now it's important here that if you do your clients schedule reports or change the run as to themselves, and they're using reports like the access report, the administrative section, then the reports won't run, because only vendor level and above can run those reports. So be clear in your name that you are choosing, that your client and yourselves know what's in the schedule. So right now, how often do you run reports and when do you run them? This is the key. So if you have a client who wants their report every day, and usually the statements we hear are, my client would like the email for yesterday, and he wants to get them when, or she wants to get them when they get to work at 8 a.m. in the morning, they want them in the inbox. So fine, let's run it daily. And we know they want them at 8 a.m. So most people would probably say, great, give it an hour, let's run the report. And if I'm thinking that, so is everybody else. Remember, I'm running the report for yesterday. Yesterday finished at 23:59:59. So if I run this report at 7 minutes past midnight, it's probably going to have a clear and free hit on that report server because nobody else is choosing to run their report at that time. I could run it at 12 minutes past 1, same thing. On the hour, quarter hour, half hour, 20 minutes. Those are generally the times that everybody chooses to hit the report server. So remember, the report data for yesterday has already populated the server. It's sitting in the server and it is ready to be pulled as the clock strikes midnight. Better to give it a little bit of time to make sure that any device that should have updated has updated, but choose a time frame after midnight. The report will be sitting in the person's inbox by 8 o'clock. But instead of worrying that the report is not running because everybody chose 7 a.m. at the same time and the report server has been hit and now is running all these reports, rather choose a time frame that nobody's thinking of. And advise your customers the same thing is applicable for them. Whatever time they're thinking, we're all thinking it. We think we're unique, but we're creatures of habit. Same for weekly reports. By default, we've set that to a Monday, which means nobody generally changes it. So everybody runs a report on a Monday and they run it between generally 6 a.m. and this is South African time. So that's 4 a.m. GMT, and they run this between 6 and 9. Those are the commonest times people choose. If I'm running a weekly report from Sunday to Sunday, simply put, I can run it from midnight on Monday to 5 on a Monday and probably find some space in the report server, run quickly, get the reports out nice and neatly for my users. We have, as you know, upgraded and upscaled our new report server, so things are very different to the old one. But these little hints will make sure that you don't sit with your customer worrying that reports are not running and wondering why at 8 minutes past 8 the email hit their server and they're going, yes, but I need them 8 minutes earlier, and we changed the schedule or the report in the schedule, we don't change the time on the schedule. Think of the time as a very powerful little tool. So the other thing is who gets the email. As you know, you add the recipients in, and that becomes who gets it and when. And then we save it. Now I'm going to finish that. So as I said to you before, I can run one schedule with 10 reports. That means 10 reports are going to run one at a time. So I can instead have 10 schedules with one report, or 5 schedules with 2 reports, knowing now that you do, those 5 schedules are going to run concurrently rather than one at a time. So the 10 reports will run together if I create more schedules rather than one schedule with 10 reports. So as you know, you cannot, or a schedule will not complete until I've added a report. And now what's nice is I go and choose my custom report and notice same fields are available to me and I just choose OK. Now we have done a few things with the new report server. We have limited the number of reports that can be added to a schedule to 10. We have gone through all the data we've got, and we see that that generally is the safest bet. It also makes sure that people think about scheduling when they hit the limit and they hit number 10 or number 11, that they think about a second schedule. But to recap, create a schedule, give it a unique name, give it something that they know when this is in their inbox, this is critical. So this, instead of maybe calling it driver, this is your critical reports. Read these first, okay? And maybe we add the asset rating and the trip listing report here, and then, or speeding events, and then we could have less critical reports in different schedules. Knowing full well that on Monday at 9 a.m., this customer would like their reports to go to their Monday morning meeting, give them their critical reports in one schedule, and edit accordingly. So you can build a few schedules, and again, starting with, are we giving the customer the right information for their outcome? So to recap, in the manual section, you saw how powerful a tool each of these templates that we've built for you are. You can customize them to your heart's content. You can add and remove data. You can change a report like a trip listing that I showed you into a speeding report for a month. The speeding report will only give you data for 7 days, but maybe you could edit the trip listing. Same for any other report. The data is there, it is usable, and you can save it as a custom report for your customer specific to their needs. That then can be used in a scheduled report, knowing that you've built the correct template or the correct custom report for your customer. You've given it the correct name. Your customer can then schedule reports based on what is available to them. It is important to consider which report do they need, when do they need it, and which recipients need it. As I said, if you're thinking a time, somebody else is thinking the same time. Change the time. Give the report the best option to pull the data as quickly as possible, and then give the client the ability to see that report when they need it the most. The other thing to consider while I'm here is that we find the commonest times that people run reports, Monday morning and the first of the month. Those are the two commonest times. And when it's a Monday, the first of the month, well, that's just a double whammy. We also find, interestingly enough, that customers come to us at the end of the tax year and need to pull a full year's tax reports. So things to consider prior to even going down this route is consider, what does my customer need? If they need a report that gives them the trips done in a month, and they need to record those and file them for tax purposes, but they're never going to use that report, let's say, on a daily or a monthly basis, create that report, run it on the 3rd of the month, run it for the last month, and make sure it's given the correct name, tax reports for filing, and then they will store those every month. And then at the end of the tax season, for example, there's no rush to get back to running 12 different trip listing reports and then having to find an asset that was deleted and a device that was changed and having to go back to a different time. So think of what the customers need. As I say, first of the month is always busy. Mondays are always busy because by default, we've built that. But your customer could run the reports on a Sunday evening and still get the same sort of data that for a week, rather than running it on a Monday morning. So there's a lot of power in the reporting. You can see it seems simple enough. I've tried to break it down into bite-sized chunks. There are many pieces to it, and for consideration, many things to think about and to discuss with your customers.